so much for joining me today, everyone. Before we get into quite a meaty topic, I would love for you all to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about what you're involved in.
Sure. My name is Andreas Schemm. I'm Ecosystem and Operations Director at Human Protocol. And yeah, we at Human Protocol, we are hosting this conference, but when we're not, we are there to provide an ecosystem for people to build new economy, new markets, especially in jobs and in AI.
Hey, I'm Alex Newman. You might know me from GitHub as POSIX4E. Before I founded HCAPTCHA, I was a Linux contributor, and now I help write the codes at Human Protocol.
Hi, I'm Richard Welsh. I run a company or a collective called Decent Partners. I've been building communities on the internet around fans and platforms for about 15, 20 years. And I'm kind of just interested in like how incentives and people and technology sort of play together.
Hi, hello. I'm Miguel. I'm the founder and CEO of Betty. Betty is the first football assistant powered by AI that predicts the goals before it happens.
Awesome, thank you so much. So Alex, I would love to know a little bit about your role as a protocol designer. What does that involve, and what impact is AI having on your day-to-day right now?
Well, by protocol designer, I mean I have read and understand all the lines of code on the repo and help kind of facilitate the technical development aspect. So Human Protocol is a protocol, right? And someone has to design it. Oh, sorry about that. I hope I'm not making too much noise. So yeah, I mean, just kind of helping to steer the technical direction. Although honestly, now we let the community run most of the roadmap, and I just try to make sure everything kind of fits their vision. I'm sorry, what was the second half of your question?
And how does AI kind of fit into your role, and how are you adapting to it?
Yeah, I mean, so as a little background, HCAPTCHA, which is the previous thing, I think we said had about 300 million monthly actives about 3 years ago, and all of those workers are contributing to data labeling with AI. So in essence, data labels are what powers the intelligence of AI. Like, how do computers know how to see and understand the world around them? You tell them what they're looking at, and they learn just kind of like a baby does, except for much slower.
And so in terms of the impact of AI on society, what are the things that most worry you or unsettle you? Or equally, if you're very pro-AI and how it's integrated, what makes you feel excited?
Yeah, I think the way you framed that question is incredibly timely. And I think that I'm very much against AIs controlling nuclear weapons or autonomous killing machines. I think that as long as there are people, there will be war, but we should keep the people in the loop. And so I think in regards to nuclear weapons operations, military endeavors, there's really not enough discussion about that subject being something that should be powered by AI. I think in terms of, am I afraid that AI is going to eliminate jobs faster than it creates them? I think that's very unlikely. If you look at the history of technology, we've never seen that before. So we've been adding technology to the human, basically one of the main things about humanity is the use of technology. Whenever we've added new technology, there's been more jobs. And I think productivity increases from AI are the only way we avoid a societal collapse. So in that sense, you could view me as as pro-AI, but thinking that we need regulations on AI from a vertical basis. So I think that we as a society need to say, for instance, we should not have AIs controlling nuclear weapons, that human beings need to be in control of nuclear weapons. And this is actively being debated. So right now, there are countries where nuclear weapons can be launched without any humans in a loop. The example is Russia, and I think that's incredibly terrifying. That if with a computer accident, all of Russia, which has the largest amount of nuclear weapons in the world, could launch all of them randomly. I think that's just wild, and I think that needs to be stopped. But as far as like Do I think that we should limit the strength of AI or slow down development of AI? I think that that kind of horizontal approach should only happen after we exhaust the verticals approach of saying, when do we not want AI in the loop?
And I guess, it'd be interesting to hear from anyone else in the panel, when do we not want AI? Nuclear weapons sounds very solid.
Yeah. I welcome
to
people to debate that.
It's good we jumped straight to nuclear weapons, because I was afraid we weren't going to go there. But,
we went there.
I think that's all of that stuff is actually. I didn't expect you to have that position. Actually, I thought you would be more dystopian on the kind of the jobs issues. But it does make sense that again, there's a sort of a natural cultural backlash against anything novel and new that seems to come from nowhere. But obviously, AI research has been going for a long time, right? And so it's almost like the iceberg that you see coming up, but there's a lot of space underneath the sea that actually that's the work that's been going on for 50 years? I'm not the...
150.
150 years.
So Geoffrey Hinton's grandfather was George Boole,
right?
Who was in the Royal Academy.
Yeah,
the guy, you guys might have heard of Boolean logic.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book on the calculus of intelligence over 100 years ago that actually, you can read it and it talks about, in essence, a symbolic version of LLMs. And so, I would say it's been at least 100 years.
So in a strange way, like what tends to happen, and you see it with social media now, it's like, it's the sort of media environment that everyone's in. So it's almost like there's the story of the two fish in the water where two young fish swimming along and they're like, they're swimming along normal. It's an older fish comes to them and says, are you enjoying the water? And the two young fish say, what's water? And so there's this environment that everyone is kind of in, which is the media environment, which is the world of narratives, which is the world of kind of attention. And obviously attention-based media it works for people on both the upside and the downside to have like terrifying stories. And so, I mean, I'm slightly terrified of Russia now and nuclear weapons and the fact that could launch today. So I don't know how I'm going to deal with the rest of the day. So thank you, Alex. But I think that's almost this weird conversation that because media is so fragmented, because the incentives around media are so weirdly kind of schizophrenic, that's when you end up with the sort of the narratives sort of shaping popular opinion and shaping politics in ways that are kind of detached from the actual incentives of the technology. Like, it's very rare for you to have a politician stand up and say, well, this AI technology, it's been around for 150 years. Like, they don't start with that. It starts with, is this either the worst thing ever to happen to humanity or the best thing to ever happen to humanity? And it's like, it's kind of probably not really either of those.
It seemed like the UK, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, hosted a big AI safety summit, which, seemed to lean really heavily on like the worst future applications of AI, but it seems to already be like kind of applied at scale, or being applied in ways that are already happening, like it's already here. And so I wondered what those big events by, bodies like sort of the UK government do to the perception. And how can the perception
Wasn't
of AI...
Wasn't that Rishi Sunak trying to get a job from Elon Musk? I thought that was the aim of that. But.
So I think the high level that people have to realize, and I know this sounds dumb to even say out loud, but corporations are pretty strategic and smart. And so if you look at the types of regulation being pushed by people at the head of AI, it's to solidify their stronghold of it forever. And I think that when you talk about real dangers of AI, the real dangers of AI is that it's not in our hands, it's in the hands of Google or Sam Altman. Right? And I think that's the real problem with these type of regulatory frameworks, is that all of these politicians are looking for jobs when they're done. And they know they can pass the law that solidifies Sam Altman as God King of the universe for 100 years. And I think that the reality is, it's probably, we probably need to look at it exactly the opposite way and say, what does the future look like without remarkable increases in productivity with a population that's has upside down demography, and that most likely without having some ability for productivity to keep up with demography, we are, we go back to the nuclear war argument. And sorry, just one other thing I'd like to point out. these aren't just strategic nuclear weapons, these are tactical nuclear weapons. So this means that they're meant to be used as a part of normal battle.
Right.
So we most likely, if this Ukraine thing continues, will see the use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine, controlled by AIs, in the next few years. Like this is, and there's no one talking about it. And I think that what you do see people talking about is everything other than this, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I have a big hero friend, Frances Haugen, and she's been traveling around the world to pass regulations vis-a-vis social media. And the one thing that is fairly clear is that the regulatory framework, rather than focusing on building transparency and understanding what's going on, there's a big focus on telling companies what they can or cannot do, or even how they should do what they're doing. And before we even have any transparency of what's going on. So like another way of saying this is, perhaps before we say whether or not you can build a model this strong, we should have some type of framework where governments are saying, okay, AI companies, I want you to tell me how many people under the age of 14 are using this technology, how many people under the age of 14 are using this technology past 2 a.m., right? Like simple, obvious things aren't being discussed. And instead we're having the conversation of whether or not these AIs are going to gray goo the whole universe, right? Like, and that is not by accident. These are not dumb people doing this, right? This is a way to stifle any real control of society. And unfortunately, the media, as you point out, if it bleeds, it leads, is playing a huge part in that.
So actually, we've got Stephan on the line from New York, who is a lawyer in this space, and I would love to kind of pose a question to Stephan about, the future of, regulation of AI and how the industry is kind of readying itself for that or adapting to that. What do you foresee, maybe in the next year or so in terms of regulation in the space?
And nice to join you all virtually.
Nice to see you too.
It's good. It's good to hear that you guys jump right into nuclear proliferation and how AI is going to impact that. I'll take a step back. In terms of regulation, I think what we often find, and I think that probably the easiest or best way to try to understand new innovations in technology, and this is true with the semiconductor, either semiconductor development or even the development of the railroad 150 years ago, is to sort of reason by analogy. I think oftentimes some of the frustration that we see with regulation is that technology just moves very quickly, a lot faster than House of Commons or U.S. Congress and other governmental agencies. And so what we find is we have this sort of dead space, if you will, where technology is rapidly progressing, or it's a sort of new concept, and regulators have to try to understand exactly what the impact of this technology is actually going to be, and that can actually be quite difficult to do. I think from what I've seen, and the House of Commons just released quite a comprehensive report in July, detailing what the challenges of AI are going to be, the merits on both sides, and I think there certainly are important considerations on both sides of the coin with respect to work and with respect to AI's impact on how we are going to intermediate lethal weapons and so on and so forth. And so I think we are in a discovery phase, and I think governmental agencies are in a discovery phase. And I think there's, that's an important task to engage in. To Alex's point, we don't want to be in a situation, and as we've seen in the past, for instance, laws that have to do with social media are sort of, I think the large criticism is that they tend to be quite reactionary. And so there is a balance between not being too reactionary, but at the same time, we don't want to be overly prophylactic and create regulation or a sort of framework for thinking in that way that it doesn't actually end up making a lot of sense once the technology has sort of blossomed.
Yeah, just to jump into what he's saying, I have a really short thing that you can keep in the top of your head to figure out if they're moving in the right way in regulation, right? So you can regulate and say, we want you to give us information. We can say, we want you to don't do these things. and we can say, here's how we want you to do your business, right? And when we're in these early stages, it's transparency that we need. And like, we should all be asking ourselves as a society, like, let's take the nuclear weapons thing. Does anyone disagree that AI, does anyone disagree with this point? I assume that all of us want humans in the loop with nuclear weapons, right? So this is something we can all agree on, right? And I think transparency has always got to be the first step before you start telling companies what to do. And it's often the last step that regulators want. And I'm just going to be a cynic and say it's because they don't get any power when all they do is pass a transparency law. But ultimately, transparency is usually all you need. Like, whether it's Facebook or OpenAI, I'm sure you guys have met these people. They're some of the nicest people in the world. They actively really do want to do the right thing. So just by causing companies to have to self-report and actually provide information, one, it means regulators can actually pass laws that make sense. But more importantly, in companies, the only thing they can do is stuff that's measured. If anyone has worked at a large company with KPIs, it's a tyranny of the KPI, right? So all the government really has to do is say, we just want you to measure the amount of under 14-year-olds on your platform, let's say on OpenAI. And rather than saying, like, there might be some pushback where someone will say, like, well, does that mean we have to ID everyone on their platform, right? And that's what I would say is bad regulation. You're telling them how to do their job. There's 100 ways we can detect 14-year-olds on the platform. Mainly 14-year-olds are horrible, and they'll just tattle on each other because they, like, messed each other up on the playground. Like this doesn't require rocket physics, right? And so, you guys help me advocate here, right? Have your government start with transparency and allow the companies to just say what their plan is to deal with these issues. And then we can start talking about regulatory once the discovery process is done.
So could I up you on your terrifying dystopia?
Yeah.
So your terrifying dystopia is about Russia and nuclear weapons. So right now, people are building or attempting to build parallel financial systems in Bitcoin and different cryptocurrencies. Like, at the moment, like, Bitcoin threatened to change the banking system. It hasn't. It's just illustrated, like, how it works, and people have learned a lot. But the more advanced stuff, there are networks like Polkadot, which is trying to build sovereign political machinery that actually exists without checks and balances, that exists entirely outside of the purview of governments.
Or the network state.
Or the network state. And the crazy thing about those things, like Balaji and the network state, that it's got huge amounts of following.
And capital.
And capital. And it's idealistic. It's like, there's idolatry, there's sort of hero worship. And so, like, maybe Balaji will be the person who, like, has the missiles. Like, and so with people who are maybe kind of, I think there's almost like this, everyone is, as you said, that everyone's focusing on one thing and avoiding looking at the other thing. There's almost this sort of, like, as the sort of revolution of crypto technology kind of emerges, you're creating an entirely unbounded new financial space that can exist entirely parallel, that also meshes quite nicely with AI. So I think that's like the sort of the terrifying on the terrifying is that, and that's kind of like where there is no government to slow things down or moderate or mediate. It's entirely like people creating new belief systems that are extreme in many ways. You said that 14-year-olds, it's easy to tell them online because they argue with each other. Having hung out in a lot of DAOs, it's mostly 40-year-olds and 20-year-olds. Like, everyone manages to argue pretty well, like, however old they are. So I think in some strange way, there's this sort of weird, almost emerging new parallel kind of like organizational and capital formation system that is potentially the part that will take some of those ideas and maybe like even like for just shits and giggles, because it's the internet. Like, so it's an ironic firing of a missile. Like, I don't know.
I'd still take Balaji over Russian ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah.
But then you're trusting one man.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not great, but you know, I want to point out that I think that all of these technologies represent a serious harm to children. I think that's the other one that I think we really have to figure out. But the thing that I've noticed is that Generation Z is the most isolated generation in history. And so the thing that I struggle with is what does it mean if this is going to become their best friend for kids that don't have any friends?
Yeah.
Is that something that I want to? That one I haven't got my head around, but it's definitely here.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that feel a lot more comfortable speaking to an LLM than a psychologist, and I don't know what I think about that, but it's definitely here.
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of the issues on the side, but once again I think that with all these conversations, I was recently in Australia, and they have this remarkable ability to pass laws that somehow the Green and the left wing and the conservatives all agree in. I think that's something that we've kind of lost in America, at least. And so I'm trying to get people to think, like, what's something that we can all agree to, right? And I think that humans want human beings to be the prime species on the planet, even if it's biology.
I think there's quite a lot of people. There are weird. I listen to a podcast. Sorry, I'll go off on a tangent. But there are people who want human extinction. Like that's like an actual position. So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I hopefully not many though.
No.
I would love to come in with a more positive note after all the doom and gloom. And that is, I think there's a lot of focus on that, and rightfully so. But there's also positive aspects.
Right.
And I think one of the things that needs to happen is democratizing access, where a lot of people, like if you can't afford an 18K a year data scientist, like you're struggling in your company. You mentioned that with big companies are shaping this. So there is something where we need to democratize access, that people can easier build their own models, that they easier understand what could help me in what situation, and what wouldn't, what would do harm, what would do good. And I believe there is projects out there, and Shameless Black, we are one of them. But basically, we are really in this because of these reasons, right? There needs to be fairness, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be education, there needs to be openness to new technologies.
And it's good for the economy.
It's good for the economy. Yeah. Everybody is there. There's like when coal came, everybody was like, no, what about the other stuff? When the renewable energy came, the coal workers said like, no, what about us? So there's always the next step, and there's always a positive solution for people to switch gears, basically. And I believe with more and more people being able to use AI for good, and their whole conference is dedicated to that, right? I believe the outlook is not purely bleak, although I agree there is certain things we absolutely do not want to have.
The nuclear weapons thing, we can stop.
Right.
Like, this is something that when you poll has 99% support, you just have to tell your politician.
What about you, Miguel? So, know, as an AI scientist,
I basically agree. I have a more positive vision about AI, but I agree with Alex related to the transparency. I think it's the principle to really grow and use the AI. I think even the economy based on transparency and AI could be very good for the development of humankind. So I see if we want to survive a human, if you do the proper thing, I think we are going to have a better life and not so struggle using the AI to support our evolution and not rather the different aspect of AI.
And just to take that to you, I mean, the transparency is how you discipline the network states to work for humanity, right? So if we assume this is going to happen no matter what, AKA, if we assume rich people are going to take their money to Caribbean islands and start independent communities, which they've been doing for 100 years, the question is as they amass more power, how do we discipline them? Well, they probably should be having some metrics on these types of things, right? And and it doesn't have to stop with transparency, but without the numbers, I don't see how anyone can regulate anything.
Right. But I think if the transparency and we as humans push the freedom of our data and connect a bit with F3, we can have the data as a new commodity. So, and could be very helpful for humans and also for corporations, because the AI models now they are scraping all the data from the internet, and I think in 3-4 years we will not have more data, and you have the power of computing all the data, and we are being without data for the future. So, are you using synthetic data produced by AI, which is a risk, or we collect, for example, the companies can sell to the AI companies these data to improve models, and we as users can do the same when we are navigating through internet. And I think if we drive the AI in this path, I think could be very good for us as humankind.
You should probably tell the audience what synthetic data is.
Sorry?
You should probably tell the audience what synthetic data is.
Synthetic data, basically the AI models with the data they produce more data based on the data to learn with this synthetic data. So this is a process, but could be a random and could be a danger using this kind of data because could not be real.
I joke it's training AI models on AI dreams.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
But you said about the danger is with regulators and the concentration of power, and obviously bad regulation concentrates power and protects the incumbents, so who do all sorts of bad things, and then ultimately the regulators don't understand enough, and so you end up with like just sort of regulatory capture. And you've got WorldCoin being the solution to a problem that OpenAI is creating, and so I think that for me is like, again, sort of going back to the media, because what I know that you saw this with regulators stopped the BBC from competing with Netflix before Netflix was a thing. And ultimately, Netflix then absorbed all of the money and all of the power into Silicon Valley and West Coast America. And so media has concentrated in that part of the world with Google and those companies. So how does this not become a battle of 4 or 5 companies that are all probably based in America or like the largest states? How does that not become the sort of like everyone has to mediate with those guys and they sort of set the terms of the deal? So that's the issue right now with governments is the like Facebook and Google and Netflix, they're so powerful, and again, Rishi Sunak wants a job, so like there's an incentive for people to sort of bend the knee to a certain extent and go, well, they're so big now, what are we going to do? And so it's like, how does this start with a sort of more grassroots way of the data kind of emerging through some sort of shared ownership, like where actually that could emerge in South America, and we're not just going to end up with more expansionist sort of proto kind of colonialist like 2.0, like how does that not just end up in that? And it's not dystopian, I don't think, because at least there are the sort of the lessons of history that you can look at this stuff and you can go, this is what happened when regulators stopped the BBC from being a public service broadcaster that expanded its remit to be global, because that it should be national. And but the other side just saw opportunity and this new kind of way of capturing attention. So.
Well, I think the EU regulators definitely have gotten smarter with DSA versus DMCA. So I don't know if you guys realize this, but in essence, the European economy did not grow from 2008 till now, adjusted for inflation. And the American economy almost doubled, but it's almost all big tech. So why is there no big tech in Europe? I can tell you it's DMCA. You cannot run a company like Google within Europe. The DSA is a lot smarter regulation because they just exempted everyone that's less than 45 million people on their platform. And I think that's kind of the reality is that the life of companies is short compared to humans. The average life of an S&P company is now down to 7 years. When I was born, it was like 15 years. My parents' generation was 40 years. So the life of these corporations is very, very short. You know, we used to have Dalal and HP and all these things. And, you know, Apple's really the only one that's actually been able to reinvent itself once. Maybe Microsoft. So I think that the question is how do you start? And so the answer is, one, regulators need to allow small companies to be small companies. They just need to get out of the way because they can't comply. And we need people like Newman. Right. So I'll let Andreas talk a little bit more, but you know, you need protocols which can support small companies.
Before we get into that, I would love to know Stephen's thoughts on whether it is too late to kind of rein back in big tech as almost like, as you were saying, kind of proto-colonial approach. What have we missed the boat on that?
Yeah, just an easy question to answer. No, look, I mean, I'll answer that. I think there's a sort of important thread that everyone was just talking about, and Andreas talked about it as well, which is really democratization of the technology. I think one of the most important things, it's often missed, and understandably so, is what the value accrual is actually going to look like in terms of economic output of AI. There's a lot of talk about how this is going to affect jobs, whether it's actually going to displace people from doing things, how that's going to impact concentration of wealth. Going back to the railroad, I mean, we had this sort of the railroad was really the precursor to a lot of the trust busting that we saw in the 1920s and the sort of advancement of the antitrust movement. None of that would have, I should say, a lot of the sort of growth and concentration of economic output that the railroad brought out, amongst other things, really led to the conditions that we saw in the 1920s in the United States and really in other parts of the world, but really in the United States. And so the question is, how do we sort of more equitably distribute that economic output rather than allowing it to sort of concentrate into the hands of a few people? And I think that's sort of the basis of the question. This is, to my mind, and I spend most of my time really as a blockchain lawyer. That's what I do here at Fenwick. And of course, invariably, there's AI that gets inserted to that all the time. And so I've asked myself this question, what's so great about Web3 blockchain? Why did I decide to do this? And for me, it's really about taking away the inefficiencies that we can often get from sort of centralized, concentrated areas of power, whether that be in a sort of banking financial system, whether that happens to be with how we actually distribute potential inputs or uses of AI, and how we collectively, in a sort of very decentralized way, distribute the benefits and value accrual ultimately of the use of AI. And I think that's really the promise of Web3 and blockchain to me and to many of the clients that I work with, which is how do we make things more efficient? Because what we found is over the last 100 years, we have, if you want to look at the banking sector, for instance, it's very much Victorian age technology and processes. Think about how you write a check to somebody, or think about how you access your money or how you send money to someone else. Behind the scenes, there might be 7 or 8 different intermediaries that are actually helping move, a ledger balance, a sort of Web 2 or Web 1 ledger balance from one account to the other. And the question is, why does it have to be that way? In 2023, in the 21st century, why should we be using this sort of Victorian era thinking? And I think Web3 really allows us to do that cryptographically backed transfer of information, whether it happens to be a ledger balance or whether it happens to be something related to AI. And so, I think that is the promise of Web3. And I think human protocol is doing a lot to democratize not only access to the AI tools. I can go and I can hire someone. I can put out a job request for an AI tool or project that I'm working on, which normally I wouldn't be able to do. I'd have to go to a big guy, raise a bunch of money to do that. And then there's the other side, that's the input side. And then there's the output side, which is, there's a equitable distribution, meritocracy, if you will, that you're paid for the work that you do or what you contribute to that system. And I think that's an incredibly powerful tool that we're going to see. It's already emerged with blockchain technology, and we're going to really see grow, and I think in lockstep with the growth of AI.
Quick question: Do you think you should those two technologies or areas that are emerging together, they should be kind of regulated in sync, or do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So great question. I mean, I don't know if I see AI and blockchain as sort of needing an omnibus regulation. I think, but at the same time, and this is sort of I'm recognizing I'm giving a very lawyerly answer here and trying my best not to. I think really it's a complex system to navigate. We don't, at least with respect to blockchain, we don't really, the only thing that we really have to grab onto are regulations that have been in place, for 80, 90, 100 years, some of them newer, but really that apply to the traditional financial system. And so there is a lot of gray area in terms of trying to navigate, what that regulation for blockchain ought to look like. And U.S. Department of Treasury and FinCEN and others are actively at work trying to understand the technology, and I think for the most part, well-intentioned. The federal government, at least on the U.S. side, I believe, sees the power of the technology, but it has to be used in an appropriate way. I think the same is true for AI. AI is it's such a loaded term, such a broad. The span is quite broad when we talk about AI, and it has the ability to impact all different sorts of industries. I think historically in the United States, we tend to regulate on an industry by industry basis. Whether or not that actually changes with AI, I think is an important question, and one we'll see, whether or not it will follow the status quo of regulating on a industry by industry basis, or Congress or a regulator in the United States or the European Union or a collection of governments. They come together and say, no, this is of a different kind, not just a different scale, and it's not going to work for us to regulate on an industry by industry basis. We need some sort of omnibus regulation for AI. Well, this has been a really in-depth conversation. We've veered from nuclear weapons to work and regulation, but we've covered a lot of ground. So I want to thank the panelists for brilliant insight and a lot of future gazing. So thanks so much, and thank you for all your... Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.